All right, episode 1 of JJ Builds Builds. Welcome to the video, guys. Today we're going over one of my favorite builds that I've made so far. That is the Prickly Duelist. So let's get right into it. Alright, so the basic idea of Prickly Duelist was to create a somewhat tanky duelist build that can really survive and thrive in melee brawls, as well as, obviously the prickly part, being able to really take that damage and that pressure and have the thorns and prickliness to obviously damage anyone who's attacking you. It's a really fun build. I really enjoy it. And let's get into the meat of it. So the basis for this build really came from, excuse me, this ability right here, which is Redirect Pain. It's one of the base duelist class pip spenders. And you can see here, focus your will, ignoring pain with the damage preventing barrier, and then begin reflecting damage back to your attacker if the barrier is broken. So you can see here at the bottom with 5 pips, you get a 1400 barrier, which is pretty insane, actually, and a 55% retribution for 18 seconds, which means 55% of all of the damage that you're taking is going back at whoever hit you, which is pretty insane, actually. And you can definitely get, some pretty good damage out with this. It also goes off of damage over time effects, so severe bleeds, severe burning, poison, stuff like that. It'll actually reflect a percentage of every single one of those ticks that you take back at the attacker, which is pretty good. The second part of the Prickly Duelist comes from this ability right here, which is Haunt. It says Haunt 3 enemies, reflecting 35% of their attack damage as nature damage, and then healing you for 35% of that damage taken. So between Redirect Pain and Haunt, you're actually, getting close to reflecting 90% of the damage that's coming back to you, or that's coming and hitting you, as well as, healing for a little bit, which definitely helps your healers. The biggest issue with these two spells is that they're on massive cooldowns. So they're both 45-second cooldowns. Sorry, that's Banshee will. Both 45-second cooldowns. And that's why we run Punch Drunk, because we don't have a ton of max HP as a duelist. And you can actually, you can proc Punch Drunk pretty reliably. I think it's on a 30-second internal cooldown. I'm pretty sure that's what it is, which is really good. I mean, I've had fights where I proc, Punch Drunk 2 times, and I get 3 5-pip redirect pains within a fight, and that can be pretty insane. And it's a lot of fun too. I mean, you just don't see your health moving a lot of the time. So this is going to be the build off here on the right. Obviously, I'm going to be running Guinea. It's the only race available to play Duelist, at least for now. I don't know if that's changing in the future or not. Hopefully, that'd be kind of cool. The main disc that I chose first for the build was Banshee here. Banshee is a really good damage discipline. It's got a lot of really good stuff in it. The first one being that damage modifier you can see, plus 6.25. And that's just a flat 6.25% damage increase, which will be really helping kind of put our impales on the next level, which is going to be, a lot of the burst here, as well as that does work with, retribution damage and stuff as well. So it's pretty slick. You can put out a lot of damage, a lot of burst with Banshee. The main spell we're using there is Haunt. attack, reflect enemy, damage, healing, and we'll go over the numbers later. Banshee Whale is really, really great on Duelist, I've found, because you don't have any innate snares or slows or anything like that in your base kit, and it can be really hard to keep uptime on people, especially ranged characters, especially Wood Elves, because they'll just blink away from you. But if you have Banshee Whale, you can actually run up to him, Banshee Whale, slow him down, and then between your 2 dodges and your sprint, you can usually catch up to him, unless you get rooted for like 8 seconds and then you kind of die. But that's okay. That's just how the game is right now. I don't use Ghost Army that much. It doesn't heal for a ton that I've found, but I haven't played around with it a ton. It's a fun spell, though. I mean, it looks really cool. Angel of Death is an awesome passive. I'm not using it for this build, but it increases enemy damage. That's kind of worded weird, but it increases your damage on enemies when they're at low health. I think it's below 30%, which is really, really good, especially for damage classes that are trying to, really burst down targets. The second disc that I sell it on, I had a lot of options, but the second disc I sell it on was Underdog. And I love this discipline. I think it's a lot of fun. The main reason was for Deadly Retaliation. And I'll explain a little bit why later and kind of how that really interacts with the Duelist kit. The passives that you do get from Underdog are pretty slick as well. Payback, you get a crit streak. Basically, you gain 50% crit chance for, I think it's like 10 seconds or something, or until you land 3 crits. So it's kind of just guaranteeing you some crits, which is really slick. Death Throws is a really fun passive to play around with. I think it's a lot better on tankier melees, like, your Myrmidon, your Knight, the Templar too, stuff like that. I think Myrm is probably the best. Knight's pretty good too. Underdog, I have played around with that in this build as one of the variants. It's not the main build that I've been using. But you gain 300 attack power every time you're stunned or knocked down. And that stacks with itself, which is pretty good. We are going Rapier. A lot of people really love Pistol Duelist. I'm not the biggest fan of it. I think it's a lot of fun, but I prefer Rapier. I like being melee. The piercing damage bonus is great, similar to Banshee, where we're getting that 6.25 flat damage mod. We're getting a 6.25 piercing damage mod on Rapier, which will, like the same with Banshee, really help our impales. And Cut and Thrust is a pretty good spell. I don't think you need it because you have Expose, and you can Expose knock down anyone who's blocking or parrying, but it's still pretty good. Critical Slice will be used in this build. It increases your critical hit damage. Like I said, we'll go over all the numbers later and really break it down. Hamstring is a pretty good passive. I just didn't really have space in my build and with what I wanted to do. And I'm taking Banshee for Banshee's Whale for the slow anyway, so I didn't really need the second slow on my last basic. For minors, we're going to take Careless Whisper, which will just be your left mouse buttons, your basic attacks will buff your crit stats. So you get crit damage and crit chance, I believe are the two. Shadow's Caress is just an awesome discipline. I recommend taking it in almost every Duelist build. And I think it's going to be really good for Assassin too. It gives you health regen and stealth. And you can also pair that with something like Agent Provocateur to really get a ton of reset potential and stealth. But just Shadow's Crest by itself can definitely get you healthy pretty quick. The last minor will be Punch Drunk, and Punch Drunk it can be good and bad. It kind of depends because the proc chance is pretty unreliable. It requires people hitting you for a percentage of your health in under 2 seconds. So if you get really unlucky with your resets, it can be kind of like a wasted slot. But if you're smart about it and you kind of use your abilities in the right order, you can get a ton of, like, an insane amount of value out of Punch Junk, especially on Duelist with a low HP pool. I think it's pretty crazy. But yeah, so that'll be basically the main chunk and the big body of what the Prickly Duelist build will be. And with that, let's get into the numbers. So I actually forgot to go over this last segment that I wanted to do. So I'm just gonna, excuse me, just gonna throw it into the video where I seem fit. And that's basically gonna be the variants on the build and the passives and majors and stuff that I played around with getting to this final loadout. There's quite a few of them. This is my favorite. It's just my personal preference. I think it's the closest to the build that I wanted to create. That being said, all of these other ones are also really fun and kind of unique as well. So I've got 3 major discs that I've used in conjunction trying to figure out this build. The first one is going to be Scarecrow. The main reason for Scarecrow is just that there's a ton of Rangers out right now in this patch. Wood Elf Ranger is very strong. This is on 5.3.4, I believe. But yeah, I mean, outside of all of the Rangers, you get Aura of Terra, which is pretty solid for Duelist. You can generally stay on top of people if you pepper box them and then just stand on top of them with Aura of Terra. Then you will suppress them after they get out of the pepper box, which is pretty solid. Scarecrow is so good against Rangers since it has that piercing damage reflect and the piercing barrier. Terrifying features is okay on Duelist. I don't like it a ton on Melee just because it puts people on random CC diminishing returns, which can be pretty annoying in a group fight if you want to take out a focus target. The second one, which is easily one of my favorite discs in the game, which is Troubadour. The reason Troubadour is so good on Duelist is because the abilities don't cost any pips. So they're all free, including Consonant Chains, which is a fair amount of damage. With Troubadour, I would take Dirge of Dissonance. The idea behind that was to just kind of be kind of a passive AoEer. So I would just put up my Barrier, my Banshee, and my Dirge of Dissonance, and I would just run around and hope people hit me to do damage. Which is a different kind of build, but I wanted a little more burst damage. This will be a little more kind of AoE focused. So yeah, personal preference. Requiem is also an insane ability. I don't know why more people don't take it. It's 15% damage increase on everybody it hits for everybody in your party. Yeah, I don't know why more people don't take Requiem. The last one was Reality Warper. The idea behind Reality Warper was to combo the damage mod with Banshee to basically get a 10% damage mod between the two of them. Crazy Pills is also pretty solid on pip classes because when you're at 0 pips, you're getting that increased damage on low resource. I just found I didn't have the passive slots for it, and that's why that's kind of why I took Reality Warper out. I just didn't really have space to fit it. But Tear Reality and Alter Reality are both pretty solid. I believe Alter Reality is a 500 heal absorb, and then Tear Reality can increase cooldowns by 9 seconds if you hit every tick of it, which can be pretty good, especially if you're training healers. Just increase the cooldown on those healing spells. But those were kind of the 3 that I was playing around with in terms of majors. In terms of passives, with this loadout, you just have so many passives. It's pretty insane. So Mental Fortitude, not super necessary on Duelist at all. You have no problem with pips. On Templar, you do have problems generating pips, which is why these mental fortitude or weapon finesse passives are so good. Payback, I think I talked about it earlier, but you don't really need it because we have enough crit chance already, I think, at least for my liking, and my slots are already taken up, so it's not good enough to replace one of these slots. The one that I might replace it with is Careless Whisper, but I just like the combo between Empowered Whispers and Deadly Retaliation too much. Death Throws, a lot of fun to use. I think, like I said earlier, not that useful on Duelist, but Death Throws and Punch Drunk is just, it has potential to be a really insane combo because you can just get 2 AoE knockdowns like right after one another in a lucky kind of scenario. Underdog, I guess they nerfed it. It used to be 300 attack power that could stack with itself. Now it's 100, which makes it even less appealing, but it's a fun idea and something to definitely play around with. I just think it's better on tankier melee, especially Myrmidon. Angel of Death, 30% more damage to enemies below 30%. I've played with this as well in replace of Careless Whisper, but I've found that I get way more value out of Careless Whisper. I just let my ranged usually take care of assassinating people, unless they're, in the melee brawl, and then I can just impale them for, 1.5k or something and take them out. Punch Drunk I'm using, Shadow's Caress I'm using, Careless Whisper I'm using, and Hamstring, like I said, we have Banshee Wail, so we don't really need the slow, but it's still, Hamstring is still really good on other Duelist builds, where you don't have the innate tankiness that you do for this one running, Redirect Pain, Haunt, and Punch Drunk. This is really good for kiting out melee, especially because you can use 1 LMB chain, get 3 pips and a slow, and then you can shoot them with your flintlock, and you're at 5 pips. So they're slowed, you're at 5 pips, and you can really do a lot with that situation in a fight. So those are kind of the variants that I played around with. This is what I settled on. This is what I think, in my opinion, is best and what I've got the best damage numbers on. I wish this detail sheet worked, but hey, next patch, so we're waiting for it. So with Redirect Pain and Haunt being the 2 main abilities that kind of brought the build together, let's go through the rest of it. So in terms of Duelist base class abilities, obviously we're going to take all of the stealth abilities here. Tunnel is just a really great ability for mobility. A really great ability for mobility. It's kind of a tongue twister. And that's really great to kind of reposition yourself in fights or before fights while you're in stealth, or if you got to re-stealth, reposition yourself to be able to easily hit a target, either on the outskirts of the fight or something like that, a focus target or something. Recon will be your expose applier. It's really important to hit your recon. It's a little buggy right now in the game. It misses sometimes, and it can be annoying. It's super, super important that you always have this up on the target that you're trying to hit, because you gain a ton of bonuses from it, and it adds so much power to your kit. If you recon somebody and expose doesn't apply, just wait. Wait the 10-second cooldown or whatever and try to apply it again. I almost never try to actually start fighting somebody until I get expose on them, just because it's so strong. Go for Broke used to deal a ton of damage. It got nerfed a little bit. It still does a decent amount of damage, and it's AoE. So, if there's like a big melee brawl, you can tunnel in and go for Broke and, get a good amount of damage on 4 or 5 people. That being said, just roaming around, I almost never use it for damage. I usually just use it for a really quick dizzy down, because it hits like 12 times, maybe 10 or 12 times. So it's really easy to dizzy down people with it, and then it sets up a really easy recon because they're laying on the ground. But yeah, in fights you can get, I mean, some pretty good value in it. Oh, I guess it says up to 3 targets. I thought it was 5, but yeah, still pretty solid. It can hit for multiple hundred on multiple people, so pretty solid. If you hit an exposed target, then it's a guaranteed critical hit on every single tick of the cast. So all of those 10 ticks will be crits, which is pretty good. Ambush, I actually think Ambush is a really fun ability, and what's really underrated about it is that you get 2 pips for ambushing. So you can leap out, you perform a deadly surprise for 82 to 123 plus 102% weapon damage. And if you hit an exposed enemy while they're attacking or using an ability, then they're knocked down and you earn additional pips. So if you knock someone down with ambush while they have exposed on them, you actually get 3 pips from just 1 ambush, which is crazy. I mean, that's without buffs as well, which makes it potentially able to ambush for 3 pips and then pistol shot someone, and then you're already at 5 pips, and you can either inconceivable or impale or pepperbox or something. You can just use a full 5 pip spender right off the bat of your opener, which can be really solid. And you can do some fun stuff with like tunnel and ambush, but we'll go over that later. In terms of our melee tray, obviously we'll have flintlock shot. Hits for a decent amount of damage. It generates 2 pips, and this will be your exposed punish, your main exposed punish. So if you hit an enemy who is exposed while they're using an ability, they get knocked down, take additional damage, and you generate an additional pip. Yeah, really good pip generator, 15-meter range. I really like to dodge backwards and then flintlock. So I'll do a full LMB chain for 3 pips, jump backwards, flintlock, and then cast Inconceivable for my buffs or something. Redirect Pain is just the barrier that I went over earlier. Impale is your bread and butter bleed ability, your bread and butter damage ability. So it's basically a devastating stab to the vitals, inflicting instant damage, and it also causes your target to bleed. The bleed isn't, I mean, it's a severe bleed. It does decent damage, but more often than not, your impales are going to be on people who are under 50% health, especially with this build. Next up is Pepperbox Shot. It's a pretty straightforward ability. It's got a 15-meter range, similar to Flintlock, and it's basically just a big cone AoE damage stun ability. Yeah, I mean, it's pretty slick. It's usually not worth casting at all unless you have 5 pips, because you only get the stun at 5. Yeah, still pretty solid. Critical Slice is an awesome, just straight up, kind of fire and forget buff ability. It's a 2-part combo, which can make it kind of hard to hit sometimes if people are kind of all over the place. But the idea of this build is that you're going to be in the melee brawl. So it's pretty easy to hit people with Critical Slice, and it increases your critical hit damage. I'm not sure the exact amount, but I'll look it up after this video and put it in the comments or something. Just because I kind of forget off the top of my head. Haunt, we went over that earlier. Just another prickly. Banshee's Wail, pretty solid. I really like Banshee's Wail. It affects up to 5 people, which is actually pretty solid, especially in a melee brawl when it's pretty easy to hit 5 people. And this only costs 1 pip as well. So it's really good for, trying to run after ranged characters or kite out melee characters when you're low health, stuff like that. Yeah, pretty solid. Inconceivable, huge ability. There's a lot to it. well, there's not a lot to it. It's kind of fire and forget. There's just a lot of different buffs that you can get. Test your luck gaining between 1 and 6 buffs, buff durations, and your luck scale with pips spent. I always use Inconceivable with 5 pips because you usually get at least 5 buffs. Sometimes you'll get, 4 buffs or 3 buffs, and that's pretty lame. But that's just how it goes. And it lasts 36 seconds with 5 pips. So you can really just use it for your first 5 pips and then forget about it, and it can really, really ramp up your damage. So we can just go through them. Humiliations galore. Every pip generator earns an additional pip, which is actually just, it's so crazy. It makes it so your LMB will generate 2 pips per LMB. So it's not like Templar where you have to do the full chain to get 1 pip. You just get 2 pips for, each LMB. And then it makes your Flintlock shot here a 3 pip generator. So what's so crazy about it is that you can Flintlock shot with an LMB. I guess it has punch here, but this should be an LMB. An LMB for 5 pips in 2 abilities, which is pretty crazy. Whereas, without this Humiliations galore, it would take 3 LMBs and a Flintlock. So it cuts your ramp time by half in terms of getting to 5 pips. Benetti's defense adds 25 in combat health regen. It's not a ton, but it always helps. Capo Ferro, awesome ability. Gain a chance to attack twice with Saber Attack. So that'll just basically double your damage with LMBs, but you don't get extra pips for it. At least I haven't. Maybe you're supposed to, maybe you're not supposed to, but as of right now, you're not getting an extra pip for an extra Saber Attack. But it's still just a good way to kind of ramp up your damage. And I mean, your LMBs can hit for 200, 250, 300 on a crit, so getting 2 of them can definitely be a good amount of burst. And then the other 3 are just straight up stat buffs. Prepare to Die, damage by 9%. Agrippa, critical hit chance by 9%. And T-Bow is critical hit amount by 19%. So what's so great about this build and why I take Underdog, and this is what I said I would talk about Deadly Retaliation earlier. Deadly Retaliation gives you a guaranteed critical hit. So anytime you retaliate, and it is AoE, it's a 5-meter AoE. So anytime you retaliate, you're guaranteed to crit on your retaliate. But what we can do with that is basically take our passive, Careless Whisper, stack it to 5 times, and we get 10% crit chance and 10% crit damage. In terms of just the retaliate, since it's a guaranteed crit, we're just going, for that crit damage. But in terms of all of your other abilities, that 10% crit chance is really great too. So we'll be stacking crit damage from Careless Whisper. We'll be stacking crit damage from Critical Slice. We'll be stacking crit damage from Inconceivable. And then if we get a lucky retaliate, it'll just be a guaranteed crit. If all of these buffs are up, then you can hit for like a 700 or 800 retaliate, which is AoE. Which is, it's pretty wild actually, and it's a lot of fun. It's a lot of fun to see. I've got a couple clips, I believe, of me actually doing that. And our second passive here, I know I'm kind of jumping all over the place. I'm just kind of trying to do it how my mind takes me through it. Punch Drunk, if you take more than 15% of your max health as damage in 2 seconds, it'll reset the cooldowns on all of your powers currently on cooldown. And this is probably one of my favorite passives in the game. And this is why I don't have a ton of room in my passive slots. And it's Opportunist. So Saber attacks have a 20% chance to reset the cooldown on Flintlock shot. And so this is our Flintlock shot right here. And this is the one that, generates 2 pips, 3 pips if you have your buff up. So why this passive is so good is because it allows you to do stuff like flintlock shot somebody for 3 pips, LMB somebody to 5 pips, get a reset on your flintlock shot, right? So this is back off cooldown. You use a 5 pip impale, and then you flintlock shot for 3 pips, you LMB for 2 more pips, and you have a 5 pip impale ready to go again. And it can just be an insane amount of burst. If you get really lucky with your chains, then you can just chain, 5 pip spenders every 2 abilities, which is just crazy. This other passive I have down here in the stealth tree is Shadow's Caress. I don't know if I talked about this earlier, but increases your health regen well in stealth. You can just get a really nice resets off that. So yeah, that's all of the abilities and kind of some of the synergy. Obviously, we have Vanish, which is your little decoy, explosive decoy. Hits pretty good, actually. But yeah, it's just kind of your C power for a reset. Charges relatively slow, but actually charges a little faster with this build since we have all of this retribution and haunt damage going off, and we're healing ourselves and stuff. So we actually get a lot of C power charge with this build, which is pretty slick. And I think that does it for the abilities. So let's move on. All right, so we've gone over kind of the build, the abilities, and stuff like that. And I just wanted to show a couple combos that I've found with the Duelist. I don't have anyone here to help me that I can actually hit, so we'll kind of have to use our imaginations a little bit, but that's okay. So the first one is going to be basically a bomb. Oh, I don't have my C power, but a bomb into Go for Broke, right? So imagine I'm sitting here fighting a bunch of people, and I'm getting, like half health or something. They're all half health too. I can call for a root or something, or a knockdown on everybody, and then I can C power, which will put me into a barrel, and basically put me into stealth. So we'll barrel into stealth, we'll tunnel away and turn around 180, and then Go for Broke everybody while the barrel explodes. So we should be able to basically hit the full duration of our Go for Broke, the full channel of our Go for Broke, while everyone's knocked down. So the second combo that I'd like to talk about is going to be basically our tunnel into ambush combo, or I should say exposed tunnel into ambush combo. So let's say this tree is, an enemy player. The basic idea of it is that we will expose the player during a fight, wait for them to use an ability or something, and then tunnel and pop up and ambush them to get the knockdown. I don't have the meters on here. It takes a while to get used to the distance, but yeah, ideally you would just pop up right next to him and, do your combo, knock him down, kind of like that. And then start wailing on him and, doing your duelist thing. That can be a really good combo. It catches a lot of people off guard if you can actually hit it, because they don't see it coming. And especially if you can do that to someone's retaliate, it's almost a death sentence for them. All right, tip number 4. It might sound like a pretty straightforward one, but I think a lot of people probably don't realize or don't think about it. So let's imagine we're standing here hitting people. We hit them. I really wish I had somebody. I'll have to do that next video. Have somebody come help me out so I can do all this. But basically, you'll get your 5 pips, you know, you'll use your inconceivable, and what we're looking for here is the every pip generator earns an additional pip, right? Humiliations galore. And that's what this tip is going to be basically about. So with humiliations galore, it makes it kind of awkward for Duelist because your LMBs become 2 pip generators. So if you do a full LMB chain for 3 attacks, it'll put your pips to 5. It'll max out your pips. But you actually should have generated 6 pips because it's 3 LMBs times 2 pips each LMB. And that's pretty inefficient, which is not what we want to be, especially with a pip class where we're trying to max up to 5 as fast as possible, and then clear that as fast as possible to build up to 5 again. So the basic idea is that with your LMBs and Flintlock shot, while you have humiliations galore up, is basically just how to be efficient with your impales. And this is really about burst damage. So you have your buffs up, you have your humiliations galore up. Most people would, you know, do 1, 2, 3 LMBs to max pips and impale. But what's actually better to do if you don't have a Flintlock off cooldown is to LMB once, LMB twice for 4 pips, and then impale at 4 pips. So you're not wasting that 6th pip, because you'll LMB at 4, and then you can just auto and Flintlock again. More often than not, it'll be off cooldown, and you can get a 5 pip impale followed by it. And the basic reasoning behind it is that your impale with 4 pips can hit up to 436 damage base, which is way higher than your LMB, which is hitting for between 45 and 100 or whatever, plus weapon damage. So using that 4 pip impale is going to be a lot more damage output over the course of your buffs than doing a 3rd LMB for a 5 pip impale. So just a small thing, but one of those things that can definitely distinguish a really good duelist player from an average duelist player. So, all right. The next tip I have for duelist, I know these aren't necessarily straight to prickly duelist. They're not only for the build. They're kind of general duelist tips. But since it's the first video, I thought I'd go all out, give you guys some tips and tricks, some little gameplay secrets. So I've actually found out somewhat recently that Duelist is actually just as fast as Wood Elf, which is pretty insane considering Wood Elf has an 18-meter blink and they have Trailmaster or Trailblazer or whatever. Out of combat, you can actually keep up or chase Wood Elves as Duelist, which is pretty cool. It just takes some smart cooldown management for the most part. So you have a 7-second cooldown on your tunnel and a 10-second cooldown on your dodge. So the idea of it is that we're gonna, dodge chasing somebody. Let me wait for this pip to come back up just so I can get my timers right. Here we go. So we'll dodge. We'll go into stealth. We can tunnel. We can pop out. We can run for 2 or 3 seconds. We'll dodge again, tunnel, pop out, and in a couple seconds, we should have dodge again, tunnel, pop out. We could wait a couple seconds. There's our dodge, tunnel, pop out, and keep going like that. So it's just kind of about cycling your dodge and your tunnel and being smart about it. The one drawback, which is pretty massive actually, is that to do it, you kind of need to be out of stealth because you need to dodge. But I mean, that's kind of, whatever. Just keep an eye out for people. Don't get dizzy downed, and you can go into stealth pretty much at will. All right, guys. Well, that does it for the first JJ builds video here. Episode 1, Prickly Duelist. Easily one of my favorite classes in the game. I think they're so fun. They're kind of quirky. They're unique. And a little bow, and I guess that's my cue. So I'll catch you guys later.